these people, you know? Yeah, a lot of people say that. And frankly, whenever I hear someone beating the drums of war who is far, far removed from the actual battlefield, from the actual location of where that war is going to take place, when I see someone who's far away beating the drums of war, I automatically assume that that person suffers from erectile dysfunction. Because you're not contributing any kind of useful or responsible or mature suggestion. You're not providing any realistic suggestion. So you can only be saying what you're saying because you're trying to prove something. You're trying to prove something personal about yourself, to yourself, and to whoever might be listening, to prove you're a tough guy. Because when you say something like that, you are immediately exposing the fact that war is an abstraction to you. And you've probably never even been in a fist fight. And when people say that this is the correct Islamic response to what's happening, it always makes me think about the people that we've been told about in the Quran, the people back in the day who rewrote the Torah, who rewrote the Wahi, and they included in it all of these massacres and atrocities that they attributed to the prophets. Because they themselves were not people, the people who wrote this, were not people who had morals or principles, and they didn't actually follow what the prophets taught. And they were probably all cowards and sadistic, and they were consumed by the inferiority complex that's caused when you follow shaitan. So they ascribed their own viciousness and their own bloodlust to the way of the prophets. But that's all their fantasy. The blood of the Muslims, look, for these people who talk like that, the blood of the Muslims doesn't matter any more to them than it does to Netanyahu or to Joe Biden. They want to pretend that they're talking about measures that will act as a deterrence to Israel. But their deterrence is nothing but escalation and expansion of bloodshed. I mean, do you imagine that if the Arab states had declared war against Israel a month ago, say on October 8th or October 9th, do you really think that Gaza would look any different today than it does right now? Why, instead of 10,000 dead, we'd be looking at double that number or triple that number, 50,000 dead in Gaza today. And then add to that casualties that would be in Egypt, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, not to mention in Iran. Those American warships that are floating in the Mediterranean Sea right now would have been activated. A Western coalition would have already been carpet bombing the entire region. Maybe Al-Aqsa would have been destroyed. Maybe the Prophet's Masjid. Maybe the Kaaba. Well, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm telling you, these people are uncivilized. They're savage. Don't you see that they're whitewashing Israeli bombing of hospitals, Israeli bombing of ambulances, of mosques, of schools, of churches? They don't see us as human beings. Why on earth do you imagine that they wouldn't, in a heartbeat, make Mecca and Medina the next Hiroshima and Nagasaki? You think too highly of them, or you think too little of the Muslims in our lives and our holy places. This isn't a video game. You really think that they have any moral inhibition against using their capacity for violence against us? Well, what could have ever possibly made you think that? But it's not going to touch you. You know, all of these people who are beating the drums of war, it's not going to touch you. The bombs aren't going to fall on your house. The bombs aren't going to fall on your children. So you can, thump your chest and demand that other Muslims pay for your so-called bravery with their lives. And you can berate and denigrate the leaders in the Muslim world who are trying to find the best and the wisest way that they can to make sure that the Muslims aren't killed, while trying to find the best and the wisest way to stop the killing in Gaza. And that's what they're doing. But it's too far above your pay grade to understand it. Look, there's a massive propaganda campaign that's being waged against the Muslim rulers, the Arab rulers, right across social media. And it started right around the time when they began breaking away from the West and making moves autonomously and building their own power and building their own spheres of influence. And they're putting that black PR campaign in the mouths of Muslim spokespeople, so-called Muslim journalists and so on, Muslim social media personalities. They're putting the black PR campaign on the tongues of Muslims. Anyone who understands the region, anyone who understands the history of the region, the history of the Middle East, anyone who understands geopolitics will understand that that summit was a masterstroke in diplomacy and politicking. They're pursuing a gambit. The Arab countries, the Muslim countries, are pursuing a gambit that's going to permanently change the dynamics in the region and beyond the region. It's going to permanently change the power dynamics globally. The unification of the Muslim world and the entirety of the global South, confronting the hypocrisy and the double standards of the West, of the United Nations, the whole structure of the United Nations, the ICC, the so-called peace process, Israel, Zionism, American exceptionalism, all of it is being confronted and it's being shredded before our eyes. But you can't see it. You can't understand it. So you just go on Twitter and these other places and you listen to bitter gossip and namima and riba, just like somebody's old miserable auntie, and you pretend that that's political analysis. You know, the story that everyone is sharing immediately after the summit, in fact, it showed up before the summit. I saw it in a tweet, but it got repeated all across social media, and it even got into other outlets. And that was the claim. That was when they were calling the summit a failure, and they said that the Saudi Arabia and the UAE and some other countries were, voted against an oil embargo, and that they were against closing their airspace to U.S. military planes and so on. Well, all of that was based, that story was based on a single article, which didn't name a source for that story. And no one who printed the story can say where it originally came from or who the source is. But this became the only thing that anyone is supposed to talk about with regards to the summit. They're supposed to say it was a failure. They didn't do anything. The leaders didn't do this and they didn't do that. All of that so that you will never realize what they did do and what the ramifications are of what they did. Well, all of those suggestions that they rejected, all of those suggestions that were sensibly rejected by the Arab and Muslim rulers, all of those suggestions were informal suggestions that were recommended by Iran. And not a single one of those suggestions would have impacted Iran in any way whatsoever. But they're all the type of suggestions, unrealistic suggestions, that Iran could publicize being rejected just to make the Arab and Muslim leaders look bad. And that's why the first place that that story appeared was in the Ikhwani-leaning newspaper Al Arabi. And then once that propaganda spread, the article was removed from their website. It was only published to create this undermining narrative. And that undermining narrative is part of this whole propaganda campaign to mislead the Muslims into hating their rulers as much as the West hates the Muslim rulers. Look, you Muslims in the West, and most of these people who are spreading the propaganda are Muslims in the West. Most of the mouthpieces who are delivering this propaganda are Western Muslims, or Muslims who are living in the West. Muslims who work for corporations or who advise corporations, pro-IMF Muslims, economically neoliberal Muslims, politically neocon Muslims, Muslims who want rebellion and chaos in the Muslim world. All of these people are preying on the fact that Muslims in the West are frankly confused about what team they're on. Because you're in the diaspora, you're in the periphery, and you're not impacted by what happens in the Muslim world. And to one extent or another, let's be honest, your Muslim identity is shallow, it's superficial, it's a Palestinian kifaya draped around your shoulders. You learn your deen from the internet, you learn your deen from Google, and mostly you don't follow politics and events in the Muslim world unless there's a crisis, unless there's a conflict. And let's be honest, you look down on the Muslim world. It's poor, it's third world, it's, economically depressed, it's inefficient, what have you. That's the way Muslims in the West look at it. That's why a lot of them don't want to make hijrah in the first place. They don't have democracy and so on. You think that in the Muslim world there's no human rights. So much of what you think, what Muslims in the West think about the Muslim world is actually based on Western narratives. You don't even realize it. You're mentally colonized, psychologically colonized, and part of that mental and psychological colonization is hatred of the Muslim rulers, hatred of the Muslim governments, hatred of the Muslim states, and to say that, most of them are not Islamic. The governments are not Islamic. None of them are Islamic. They're all hypocrites. They're all greedy, irreligious tyrants. They're all corrupt. They're all appointed and controlled by the West to rule over, fake nation states that were set up by the West and that prevent the establishment of a glorious khilafah. Do you know how you sound to Muslims living in the Muslim world? You sound like fanatic, crazy people, religiously illiterate people. Look, we don't like a lot of the things that our rulers do. We don't worship our rulers. We know that our rulers in the Muslim world are human beings, and they're subject to everything that human beings are subject to in terms of temptation and wrongdoing. But they are our rulers. They're our team captains. Like it or not, that's what they are. And it's our team, and that's our captain. But you don't know what team you're on. You're in the wilderness of the periphery. You're in the Islamic anarchy of the periphery. So how a Muslim state is supposed to look, how it's supposed to function and operate, how it's supposed to be organized, is all abstract to you. It's all theory to you. Everything about the Muslim world is abstract to you. Everything about it is theory. You know, it reminds me of the fact that there was a time during the early centuries of the Khilafah, during the early days of the Khilafah, where there was prostitution in Medina and in Egypt. And the fuqaha of that time were trying to figure out what to do about it. At one point, they suggested taxing prostitution as a way to discourage people from going to prostitutes. Now, Muslims today will say haram. Taxing it, haram. They should have eradicated it. They should have gotten rid of it completely. Those fuqaha are munafiqeen, they're hypocrites. But fiqh is about finding the most Islamic way of addressing reality as it actually is. And if the ideal scenario is not an option, if a utopian perfect solution is not a realistic option, then the fuqaha have to figure out what is the closest available option to taqwa. The most accessible and achievable option that is nearest to righteousness. And that will have the most beneficial effect, and that that won't make matters worse. You go for the option that won't make matters worse, and that will make things better as much as you can. That's how Muslim societies operate, and that's how they've always operated. It's not utopian. There's no pious perfection, but you have to live in the Muslim world to see and understand how people are always trying to be righteous, and how they're always trying to respond Islamically to whatever challenges righteousness, even if the outcome of that struggle doesn't look righteous to you because it's less than perfect. Now, going back to the Arab and Muslim rulers' response to the genocide in Gaza and the summit over the weekend, if they had taken the sort of approach that these propagandists want you to want them to take, not only would the carnage in Palestine have been much worse than it already is, but it would have already spread across the region. And we would be suffering, and the people of Gaza would still be suffering even worse than they are now. But not only that, also, if they had taken that sort of an approach, or if they do take that sort of an approach, the Western institutions of power would have been strengthened, not weakened, because now they're being weakened. And populations in the West would not be supporting the Palestinian cause the way they are. There wouldn't be all of these protests and marches for Gaza, hundreds of thousands of people in Germany and the UK and elsewhere. The support for Palestine, the support for the Palestinian cause would evaporate as Western populations would coalesce and unify in opposition to Arab and Muslim hostility. No. The Muslim and the Arab leaders are doing the right thing. You can be as mad as you want to be. You can be as dissatisfied as you want to be, because I know that you are emotionally tormented by what's happening in Gaza, and that's understandable, and that's right. But the cards that the Arab rulers and the Muslim rulers, the cards that they're holding, they're playing them strategically, and they're playing them wisely. Why, just look at what happened right after the Arab Summit. Netanyahu said what he said, and he acted like he didn't care. But he's backing down from escalating their attacks on Lebanon. And now they're talking about maybe reaching a hostage release deal with Hamas. And they're implying that if that deal goes through, if that deal gets struck, then that could mean a drawdown of their attacks on Gaza, or even a ceasefire, even an end of the military operation. And this is causing a mutiny inside of his government. The hardliners want to go to war with Lebanon. The hardliners want to continue pretending that they can destroy Hamas, and they want to continue with the bombing campaign. Ben-Gvir has already called for Netanyahu to be removed as prime minister. His government is going to fall, and the hardliners are not going to be able to have enough support on their own. They're not going to be able to get enough support to form a new government, most likely. And all of that is because Netanyahu has gotten the message. Israel, and the United States as well, are getting backed into a corner by the Arab Muslim countries and the BRICS countries and the Global South. And all of this is going to usher in a new approach to the Palestinian issue, an approach that is not dictated by the United States, but which is conducted under the auspices of the BRICS countries, of the Arab countries, of the Muslim countries, by China, Saudi Arabia, and the Global South, just as I've been saying all along. You know, it's amazing to me that the same Muslims who are always lamenting about the lack of unity in the Muslim world, and always lament about the lack of power, the lack of coordination among Muslim countries, all of these people are the same ones who are constantly denigrating the Muslim governments, and who are denigrating them right now, even while they're actually building practical unity among Muslim countries, and building practical power, and coordinating policies and positions and actions across the Muslim world. You're literally seeing the Muslim leaders working together today to confront the West. Isn't that what you always wanted? And yet you never hated on them harder than you do now. I'm telling you, you're being propagandized. You're being misled, and you need to start acting like you're on the same team as the rest of us.